Welcome to the podcast, Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, your host, founder of Vocal Impact Productions, and author of Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. This week, we're paying homage to one of the greatest communicators of the last century, and arguably even longer than that. And I'm referring, of course, to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, Dr. King was not only one of the primary leaders of the civil rights movement, but he did it while modeling the incredible power of effectively framed and flawlessly delivered nonviolent verbal and nonverbal communication. And each of those elements by itself is incredibly difficult to master from a personal control and mindset and focus, but an execution, and of course, being able to get your message across to the other person. So today, I have invited leaders who are passionate about promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, aka DEI, particularly in the STEM fields, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, to join me in taking a deeper look into what it was that made Dr. King's communication style so incredibly powerful, and to look from there into identifying what we can learn from him and apply in our own daily personal and professional interactions to have greater influence and to be more effective, inspiring leaders. So without further ado, let me make some introductions. First and foremost, my first guest is a veteran of the Speaking to Influence podcast, Rachael Jones. Rachael is an expert who has held multiple executive positions in operations and analytics at Cotiviti, Anthem, Health First, and the Trizetto Group. She's currently the CEO and co-founder of Syntax, a new company being built at Redesign Health, which is a company that powers innovation in healthcare. And she's based out of Atlanta, Georgia, where she is a deep value-based care expert who's devoted most of her career to telling stories with data. I hear some connections already coming in this conversation. And a fun fact, Rachael is always down for a karaoke night, and her favorite choice of music is something I've never even heard of, yacht rock and 80s classics. Rachael, welcome back.
Hello. So glad to be here again and get into yacht rock. It'll change your life, I'm telling you.
What is yacht rock? So I've already learned new vocabulary. We haven't gotten past the first sentence yet of this whole interaction. And what is yacht rock for those of us who are totally unenlightened, apparently?
It's like mild 80s type of late 80s music. If you're like, think about it, you're in the afternoon backyard hanging out with a glass of your favorite cocktail, and it's just chill, it's a chill vibe. Think Lionel Richie, think Phil Collins. That's the vibe.
Nice. Okay. So the most important question of all is, when you are having that karaoke night, what is your first selection? Where do you grab the mic?
Usually an 80s ballad, a Journey, Don't Stop Believing, a Bon Jovi, like anything that's going to get the people going. Crowd control, crowd engagement is very important in karaoke.
We're living on a prayer.
The Living on a Prayer. You got it. That's my number 2 song. That's so funny.
It has to be, because if you're not getting people up there with the fist pounding and screaming along with that refrain, then you're not doing it right. That's awesome.
Exactly.
I love it. Okay, karaoke night, we are on. This may have to be a follow-up episode. We will see. And joining you and joining me today, Nikelle King is a strategic growth leader with Google Cloud. Nikelle is responsible for driving growth and expansion efforts within global enterprise, helping organizations to digitally transform and innovate at scale with Google Cloud technologies. As a lifelong New Jerseyan, and I'm a Jersey girl myself, so I knew we were going to connect right away, Nikelle is a champion for DEI in tech and has fostered programs and partnerships to drive DEI at scale. And when she's not working or mentoring, she finds joy in nurturing her family as a wife of 20 years and a mother to a 9.5-year-old son. Fun fact about Nikelle, she is a Beyonce super fan. And I want to make sure I say this right. So Nikelle, you got to help me. She's loyal to is it Bayhive or Beehive?
It's the Beehive.
It is the Beehive. Okay, B-E-Y, but Beehive. And often channels her inner Beyonce when she needs an extra boost of confidence and motivation. So I know karaoke is in your space, Nikelle. First and foremost, welcome back, or welcome to the podcast.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I love the fact that we get to share these little fun facts about ourselves, because as much as we work and we're mothers and we wear all of these different hats, at the end of the day, life is about having fun. And we're also not, monoliths either. So I love getting to share these different sides of myself that otherwise would not be shared. So thank you for that, Laura.
It's fun. And now, of course, the same question goes to you that went to Rachael. When you're channeling your inner Beyonce, what's the song?
Oh my goodness. Beyonce
there are all
has,
of them, of course.
all of them, right? But I would say it really depends on the mood, right? Like it could be a run the world type of a day. It could be a formation type of a day. It really all depends on the mood and what I'm looking to channel in that moment.
And when it's karaoke with friends like Rachael?
Oh gosh. Rachael also happens to be a good friend of mine. So Rachael, what would you say there?
I think formation. I think we're gonna get in formation. We're gonna get it together, ladies.
Yes, we're gonna rally. That's the rally call.
That's the rally call. So we'll put links in
Absolutely.
the show notes for anybody who's not familiar with formation yet, and whatever else other songs that we've mentioned, so people can get up on their yacht rock, on their Beyonce. And as somebody, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and karaoke is practically a religion there. So I'm a big fan myself. I have to confess, of the karaoke scene, but I tend to go, I guess, more the ballad direction too, with the Roberta Flack. She's my go-to.
It's that's a good one. That's a good one.
Something along those lines is usually
can't go wrong with that.
First one. No, you can't do wrong. You could do
Pave Paradise,
wrong, but you can't
parking lot. Yeah, it's good.
Beautiful
good
stuff. Okay, so back to, we'll have a whole separate conversation about this another day, but let's get to what we're really here to talk about. And that is the incredible power of influence as demonstrated by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what was amazing about him was how he inspired people with his words. And I always like to share with guests when I'm doing trainings or coaching, that the word inspire, if anybody out there is not familiar with it, the root of the word inspire is the same as the Latin from the word inspirare, which literally translates to breathing spirit or breathing life into something. It's not just disseminating information. It is breathing life into a message and breathing life into the people who hear it to get them on board. And he was such an amazing example of this. What do each of you think it was that made him so incredibly effective as a communicator?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick things off here, Dr. Laura. I think, first of all, thank you for even having this conversation, right? I think certainly as we approach the celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think that this is definitely a way to honor, right, his legacy first and foremost. But I think secondly is for those of us who are in spaces of influence, whether that is leadership in the corporate space or leadership within our various roles within our communities, leadership in our church, in our various churches or faith communities. I think that there is so much that we can pull from and learn from with regard to Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think as it relates to your question, I think there's two things that really stand out for me, right, in terms of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s influence. I think, first of all, just to point out the fact that he was a highly effective, communicator, right? But I would also go a little bit further and say that he was a master at communicating, because he was able to really communicate a hopeful vision, right? When there was a time where there wasn't a lot to be hopeful for or hopeful about. So I think communicating a hopeful vision, but also a purpose, right, for the civil rights movement. Whether it was in an interview or a meeting or a speech or a sermon, right, he laid the foundational vision for freedom, for equality, for integration, for economic empowerment, in ways where it not only resonated with people, but it also enrolled them in the vision and made them feel that they were a part of it. He also communicated a call to action. And I think, if you go back and you listen to any of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speeches, there's always a very strong call to action in his communication. And that is how he was able to mobilize the movement. So everyone understood what their role was in the movement and what their responsibility was in the movement. One of the most famous speeches that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Made was the "I Have a Dream" speech. There's almost no one who hasn't heard of the "I Have a Dream" speech. And he talks about, right, when you talk about hopefulness, right, he talks about, even though we are going to face difficulties, like I still have a dream. He talks about how everyone needed to be involved in the struggle for freedom and for justice. And he talked about the fact that we can't just lay down, right, and give ourselves to the sayings of the negative, because that won't solve our problems. There's another speech that comes to mind for me where I believe it's the "What's Your Life Blueprint" speech, where he's speaking to a group of high schoolers, I believe it was. I know it was a group of young people, where, again, his call to action was that even though these were young people, they needed to be involved in the movement and in the struggle for justice and freedom. And he specifically calls out, instead of burning your communities down because you're upset about what is happening in the world and you're upset about the injustices, he calls for them to build up their communities. He calls for them to go out and get a good education and to learn so that they can go out and they can earn and they can have some economic empowerment in the world. And so I think as a result of that, people really did understand their significance in the movement. And let's be clear, there were a lot of people, right, on the front lines of the movement, but there were also just as many unsung heroes who were behind the scenes as well. So you had people who mobilized and they donated and they cooked food for those who were on the front lines, and for leaders who moved from city to city to city and state to state to state. People who opened their homes and their churches for leaders and protesters who traveled across the country. Those who planned logistics. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But my point in really bringing up all of these points is that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was effective in communicating a vision, and a hopeful vision, right? Because you can have a vision and people can be out in the streets and they can be angry, and you can make, not as much of an impact because you're combating violence along the way, right? But despite the challenges, he also had a way of mobilizing people so that they understood their significance in the vision. And I think that is what made him most impactful.
I heard a whole bunch of details in there, not details, but specific points that I just want to recap here because I think it's easy for people to miss a few because they were so many packed. Number one, the ability to accurately and clearly convey a vision, and not just any vision, but one of hope. This is important for the inspiration, that the idea of wanting something more, not just being angry with what is. The idea that there is a clearly articulated call to action. What action do you need to take? And along with that, understanding that there's a variety of possible roles out there to take. So pick the one that works for you, but then you have a responsibility along with that. It's not just a demand. It's not just an expectation. It's not just an entitlement. It's not just a complaint. You have a role and a responsibility in making the better future happen. And that's really powerful. So, and whether young or old or whatever else the category happens to be. So thank you for sharing those. Rachael, any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I've loved everything that you shared, Nikelle. So thank you for a great setup. I love that you talked about the "I Have a Dream" speech. And I think it's interesting that we don't call it the March on Washington speech, which is where it took place, right? If you actually took a look at the history of that event, it was a march on Washington for job rights and for freedom. But the reason why we all call it "I Have a Dream" speech, because Dr. King told a story about a dream he had. And to me, that's the most powerful technique that he used. There's lots of specific tools around that, and I'll share 3 specific ones. But at a global point of view, the storytelling was part of the mastery, I believe. And storytelling to me is not just about, having something be warm and fuzzy and a cute little happy ending. It's about conveying emotion to draw out empathy. Because we know that what inspires change is when someone can see themselves and walk a mile in your shoes and realize the struggle and become emotionally invested to help change that outcome. right? And I think storytelling is so masterful at that. And Dr. King did that so well. And I'll call out 3 specific things that I thought about as I reflected on this topic. The first is his use of imagery and analogies, right? He talked about, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, now living in Georgia, I've seen those red hills and I've seen how vivid, right, that imagery is of having a dream of, former slaves and the sons of former slaves owners being sitting together at a table of brotherhood, right? Think about the image that conveys. You can see that in your mind's eye. He used analogies like, broken promises being a bad check. Unfortunately, if you've had a bad check bounce on you before, you know the pain of that broken promise. And so folks can put themselves in that story. They can sort of capture that vision and make that vision real with his use of imagery and analogies. I think the other powerful tool that he used was setting context. He opens the I Have a Dream speech with the story, right? Or with the retelling of the fact that on the same steps that he stood as he told that speech, right? Lincoln wrote the Emancipation, or sort of declared the Emancipation Proclamation, which quote unquote freed the slaves. But, at this moment when he was telling that story, he says the Negro is not free in America. So that set context that there is this thing that happened all those years ago, and we're still fighting for that dream, for that reality to be made plain. And I think the final tool, or sort of specific technique that Dr. King used in his storytelling was the ability to repeat. He used the I have a dream phrase 8 times. He used at the end, let freedom ring 8 times. And he did that, I believe, on purpose, because we all go to speeches, we all go to church. Well, some of us might go to church, might go to, a webinar or a TED Talk, and you'll get inspired for the moment, but you walk away and something else gets your attention, right? But if you keep hearing, I have a dream today, I have a dream that one day, I have a dream, I have a dream, even if you forget all the pieces of the dream, you remember the emotion and you remember the sort of the spirit behind what he's dreaming about. And that stays with you. And at the end, that rallying call, to your point, Nikelle, about let freedom ring, is so powerful, because you're walking away thinking about, wow, what will it mean when freedom is ringing throughout the nation? How will our lives change? How will that benefit all of us as citizens, as humans on this earth having an experience, right? So I think imagery, along with that, analogies and metaphors, setting the context, and of course, repetition are some of the powerful tools that he used in sort of telling a very masterful story.
Refrains, that repetition, those short phrases that are used over and over again, just like in songs, there after each verse, there's a refrain, you come back to it.
That's
and
right.
It sticks. And anybody out there who's listened to the podcast for a while, or who has seen some of my analyses of political debates and those kinds of things, again, I'm apolitical, but we're just looking at the effectiveness of the communication in it. It's all a phrase that I've been using for the last 6 or 8 years, is the notion of the tweetable and repeatable. What's something that's short, pithy, powerful, easy to understand, easy to remember, and easy to repeat. And you gave great examples, that let freedom ring, or of course, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream, over and over, each time with a different image that comes after it. And that's something that sticks better in that storytelling when there are those repeated pieces, because you may forget one of the specifics, but chances are, if you know that there were 6 or 8 of those refrains, or dozens as the case may be, that you're going to remember something that came after at least one of them, because it's a prompt. Remembering the refrain itself is a prompt to remember at least something that came after them. So amazing pieces. And now there's a lot that has, sorry, Nikelle, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was going to add, because I actually, went back and, the 2 things. My son had to actually memorize the I Have a Dream speech.
Wow.
I want to say in the 2nd grade. He's in the 4th grade now. And so I got a chance to kind of hear it over and over and over again, because he was doing it a lot to be able to recite with his class. But I actually went back and listened, right, to the speech, knowing that we were going to be having this conversation today. And, you know, to your point about influence, right? I think that one of the other big things that we have to point out about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that his communication is also timeless as well. I mean, I listened to that speech and I actually got goosebumps, but it's not just the I Have a Dream speech, right? It's any speech that you pull out of his repertoire of speeches over the span of his career, including those, you know, his sermons as well, is the timelessness of it, and the fact that I can take that message and the influence of that message in the heart of the civil rights movement and take that and really be inspired and be influenced today and be able to apply that to the struggles and to the movement that, you know, our respective movements that we're all, you know, fighting today. I think that it's so powerful. You know, it made me stop and think about the things that I'm sharing today and the things that I am working on today. You know, how will they impact the generations that will come behind me? And I think that it's true and it's timeless influence. And it just gives me goosebumps to just hear some of his words kind of play back through videos and through sound.
And you know what? Isn't that the point of all of this, right? The point to me of legacy is to inspire someone else to leave their own legacy. And so on one hand, it's amazing that his message is timeless. It's a little sad that the message still rings true and we haven't quite achieved the dream, but it is a timeless message. But I love that in listening and reflecting on the timelessness of his message, you're inspired to bring timelessness to your work, right? And that is the ripple effect, I think, of a strong communicator and an influencer, is to not just influence someone to do what they want, but to influence that person to take that reflection internally and see how they can carry forward their own piece of influence and legacy building. That's pretty powerful.
Absolutely, with your own flavor added to it, but to continue to push it forward little by little in your own way. And I think we'd be remiss we've been talking a lot about Dr. King's, the content of his messages, his speeches, his sermons, his whatever else, but we can't overlook the delivery. And there were so many things we could talk for years about what he did with his voice and in his presence, not just what he said, because anybody could take the transcript and attempt to deliver it. And Nikelle, you listened to it over and over being done by a 7-year-old trying to memorize pieces. And, you know, when it's delivered in different ways, it has different effects. But the fact that he was so unwavering in his certainty as he was saying it, there was no question. His voice was declarative. His voice was strong. There wasn't any kind of hesitant vocal fry. He didn't start something and then kind of trail off. And, you know, I have a dream where little black boys and little black girls will be playing with little white boys and little white girls. Like, it didn't, there was none of that. I'm not sure. Like, I liked it to be that way. And it sounds kind of good, but I'm not really, he owned every word that came out of his mouth. And there was no question in any listener's mind that he believed 100% in his own message and that everyone needed to accept it. And I think that certainty through his voice is something that is an essential quality. Otherwise, stick with email. If you're not going to deliver the message, leave it in a medium where the words will stand for themselves, because in speech, it will not, if you don't deliver it in a way that conveys what you feel. And I heard a great distinction the other day that your words that come out are what your conscience is thinking. Is your conscious communication, whereas what your delivery, your voice and your body language as you're speaking is what your unconscious is thinking and feeling and communicating.
And often that's the truth. And that's the truth that the audience receives, right? They're going to hear your words, but they're going to receive these subconscious messages. Absolutely. I think that is so spot on.
Absolutely. And he was in perfect alignment when he spoke. That connection, that congruence between his words and his delivery, which is what made him so credible and so impactful every single time that he was at a microphone. So let's talk a little bit about application. So we've got some great big picture examples of what he did well, and we'll call that the theory, right? That he's the model,
Mhm.
and we can write down examples of now in theory, what should we do? Application can get messy sometimes and can often be easier to talk about than to actually use. So if you will, be so kind, share with us one of the lessons that you learned from him in theory, but that
Mhm.
you just struggle to model, some mistakes that you may have made along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, Laura, I'll jump in on this one. The last time we were together, I talked about my heritage of being Jamaican and, and having a family that was prone to make a kind of music where you talk over each other instead of taking your turn, right? I think you called it verbal basketball versus verbal bowling. But I think, as I reflected on one of the things Dr. King did so well, I believe, is having a level of emotional maturity in his speech. You have to think, especially in letters from Birmingham jail, right? Or he's talking on those kind of national stages, just coming off of maybe being arrested or having to march and see his brothers and sisters get, pepper sprayed or hosed in the streets. There's anger, there's emotion, there's a whole lot of stuff below the surface, right? But what made him so powerful, I believe, was that he had a level of emotional maturity and could sort of temper that in his delivery. I don't have that all the time. I am human and will often let my emotion come through. And I can think of a very specific time that happened in my career recently, actually, probably 6-7 months ago. I was in a role where I'm leading a organization that's responsible for sales and hitting our sales targets. And having a conversation with the sales representative, and his attitude about missing the target was a little flippant for my taste. And if you know me, you know that I take goals and deadlines and targets seriously. I am competitive by nature. Don't want to face me off in taboo. And so he's talking about not meeting these numbers, and he's kind of being flippant about it and kind of being sort of laissez-faire. And I did not model emotional maturity. I said exactly what I was thinking. And I think sometimes, and oftentimes as a leader, you have to sort of temper what you're thinking and lead with kindness first. And I did not lead with kindness. I did not lead with maturity. I laid into him publicly in a setting of, a bunch of other colleagues. And afterwards, I received some feedback about that. And it wasn't so much that my justification was wrong, right? I was likely justified in calling out that this behavior wasn't helpful to help meeting our targets, and he wasn't role playing or modeling behavior that I want other sales associates to model. But my delivery was completely off. It was disrespectful to the team that was there because it sort of made it awkward for everybody after that moment. It was certainly not kind to that individual to be publicly lashed, right? In front of his colleagues and peers. And I didn't really get what I wanted, which was an acknowledgement of the seriousness of our goal and our target and how I can help him achieve the target, which was my actual goal. My goal really was, how can I help you as a business leader achieve your target so that we all win? And I lost sight of that goal because my emotion and my anger got the best of me. And I think Dr. King, and looking at, I'm sure there are opportunities where he might have not done this all the time, but the ones I saw, the ones that are certainly publicized, he always seemed to have a level of decorum and emotional maturity with how he spoke and how he dealt with the things that were happening, although he was probably standing on a mountain of hurt and anger. That's something that I definitely continue to struggle with and want to continue to learn and get better at.
Of course, of course. And let me play devil's advocate for a second, because there are people I know who are listening who will say things like, but you were being authentic. And if you're not going to speak your truth in that moment, then what are you repressing? Where are you not being yourself? Where are you, in the whole world of, and the whole aspects of code switching and covering. And that's a very slippery slope. And I want to do complete honor and respect to the notion that no one should ever have to cover. No one should ever be coerced to communicate a certain way. But there are those who feel very much like you do, like, hey, I speak my truth. And if you're telling me I can't say what I want to say when I'm saying it, then you make me be inauthentic. What's your response?
Let me tell you, that's the biggest fallacy that people have fed folks, because communication is a two-way street. And if you forget that for a moment, if you get so full of yourself and so full of your ego that you lose sight of the goal of communication in that moment, then you're playing a losing game, right? To me, the trap of authenticity is making it about yourself. Authenticity is, to me, is you're remaining who you are at your core, but you're remembering that it's not about you. And you're bringing your best self forward, your truth forward in a way that serves the ultimate goal, whatever that goal may be, whether it be influencing thousands in a national movement like Dr. King, or influencing your 5-year-old to pick up his toys, right? It doesn't matter to me if you're real and you've got, it off your chest, if nothing changes, if you're not successful in imparting your mission, your sort of, goal or communication, if the other person doesn't receive it, it's a failure. And so I think, unfortunately, we've turned this sort of, I use the trigger word wokeness maybe, into this weapon, and we've weaponized authenticity instead of remembering the goal, which is to communicate and to create relationships and connections in order to do something greater than what you can do yourself. That's the point of leadership, is to maximize your efforts beyond what you can do yourself through others. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we get trapped up in this authenticity game.
Yes, that's beautifully put. And I want to draw attention in particular, and then Nikelle, I want your input on this. I think the most important thing that you've mentioned more than once in this explanation, Rachael, is that the goal, we often forget to explicitly establish this for ourselves first, is what is the outcome that you want from this conversation?
Right.
How do you want this person to respond? And what do you want them to say? What do you want them to do? How do you want them to receive what you're saying? Start there and then decide how to do it. Because if you want them to say, yes, I totally get it, but you're going to call them every name in the book in the process, they're probably going to be a little less receptive somehow and more likely to deviate from the path that you were hoping the conversation was going to take. So thank you so much for reminding us about starting with the end in mind. What response do you want from your audience? Pick that first, plug that into your GPS, and then identify the route to get there. Nikelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rachael hit the nail on the head, right? At the end of the day, when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about influence and we're talking about impact, it's going to be very hard to accomplish that if you demoralize people and if you make people feel isolated. I think that there are many different ways that you can, communicate in a way where you can make your point and you can have people walk out of a room and still have some dignity, right? I think to your point about emotional maturity, one of the things I've learned, when you talk about like just the adult learner, right, is a lot of this goes back to, how we learned as children and how adults learn. And I find that when we are lashing out and when we are having these moments of, breakdown, and in some cases it's an emotional tantrum, right? It's something happened to you, you don't like what happened, and now you're going to use your power to lash back out at someone. What it shows is that you haven't developed the maturity to really formulate the words to properly communicate what it is that you're thinking and what it is that you're feeling. And I'm finding in my mature mid-40s stage of life that I am learning these things. I am relearning these things. And I think it's so critical and it's so important in positions of power, in positions of leadership, in positions of influence, is that we've all got to grow up a little bit, right? And we can be authentic and we can be all those things. But at the end of the day, we want to be respectful, we want to be professional, and we want to make sure that we help people to maintain their dignity in the process.
Yes, yes, 100%. And Nikelle, is there a particular area or lesson learning from Dr. King that you have had, that you've worked on learning to model?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question for me because I have been so super introspective lately as I'm continuing to grow personally and continuing to grow professionally. And I'm finding that this introspection for me has led me on a really interesting journey, I think, over the last 2+ years. I don't know where I learned this from, and I got to be a little bit more introspective about this piece of it, but I don't know where I learned along the way that as a minority in spaces of leadership, whether that's being an only woman or being an only person of color in these spaces of leadership and in corporate spaces, where I learned to just be complicit, right? Put your head down, go to work, let your work speak for itself, and all these other things will kind of line up for you, right? Success, earnings, respect, all these things. And the truth is, they don't, right? Like when you are not an active participant in change and you are complicit with things that you know in your heart and in your soul are not right, you're not participating in change. And so for me, a lot of it has been to really dig deep within myself and to find the courage to really speak out in situations where I'm not being complicit. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right?
Yeah. What do you mean by complicit? Where has
complicity
come through?
So one of the things that you'll find in the tech space is people of color and women are underrepresented, right? When you look at the two boxes of being a woman and being a woman of color, like you can rarely find one of us, right? It's very much a unicorn scenario. And I have found that there are scenarios where we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but companies don't model it. And so I'll give you a recent example where we were preparing for a big global meeting to partner with one of our customers. And one of the things that we're looking to do is to make sure that we are representing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the fabric of everything that it is that we're doing. And we're preparing for this big meeting. And I noticed, in this panel that we are preparing for there's all older white men on the panel. And I'm thinking, okay, who's going to call this out? Who's going to call this out? Who's going to call this out, right? Like, I don't want to always have to be the one person of color or the only woman to say, hey, here's a little bit of a different perspective, right? Here's how we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, but we can also lean into these other areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're looking to model as well. And so, I was at war with myself about it. And as we were sort of wrapping up that talking point, I just sort of said, hey, listen, I want to add a bit of a different perspective here. And I talked about the fact that, hey, it would really be great for us as we are looking to, really showcase diversity, equity, and inclusion to identify resources for this particular panel where we can have women represented. We have many women that we can tap into from a data perspective, right? And a person of color, right? And so I was really happy to see that it was welcomed, it was championed, but it could have been another situation for me where I walked away feeling like, man, there's nobody else, right? In the boat with me here. And so I think sometimes it's just finding the courage to be bold. And to your point, Rachael, right, about emotional maturity. I mean, I could have had a total meltdown in that moment and said, see, here we go again, but finding the emotional maturity and the courage to say, let me add a bit of a different perspective. And it was welcome. So I think that's one. But I think the other piece of it also is, I have found as a woman in technology that things could very easily skate to, male-dominated activities. And so I've found in my career, a lot of the things that we have done to entertain, customers or to build partnership with customers have been activities, and they've been things that have been very much targeted for a male population. And so being okay with speaking up and saying, hey, listen, this doesn't necessarily work for me because of, maybe I can't entertain late at night. I have small children that, I take care of. I have to get them off to school in the morning. So being confident and courageous enough to say, hey, listen, this doesn't work for me. Is there something else that we can do here? Or to offer solutions and to offer other ideas that maybe would have never come across, their thought process. And so I think it's just being courageous in spaces where you can really move the needle on change and not be complicit. I am finding that at this stage of life for me professionally and also personally, I am more comfortable with not speaking up. Like by not saying anything. Like I have to, like if there is something that just does not fundamentally sit right with me and it doesn't align with my value, it doesn't align with my vision, it doesn't align with my passion, that it is more uncomfortable for me to be silent about it than it is for me to actually speak up and say something. But I think it's one of the things that I've definitely learned from Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Where he was not complicit. And I think in any space, whether he was at the highest level of speaking to a president in the Oval Office, right? Or speaking to, others that were not aligned with him as far as the movement was concerned, is that he was very bold and very direct at really speaking, I think, his truth and his perspective for what his vision was.
Can I add something as you were talking, Nikelle? It occurred to me another perhaps core or linkage between what you're saying and a legacy of Dr. King is this inherent belief in the good of humanity. And what I mean by that is, it takes boldness for sure to step out and say that this and call out that this thing is not right. It's injustice, and injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere, right? Like we know that's one of his core beliefs. But there's also hope requires that you think change is possible. And for change like that to occur, you have to believe in the inherent goodness or sort of humanity of people. And I think when I heard your story about at your organization with speaking up, because trust me, I can relate to saying, does anyone not see that health equity requires other folks who are not like the same on the panel? Yeah. So I totally get that. You had courage in that moment to speak up, but I also think you had a level of maybe psychological safety or a sense of believing that the company that you chose to work with inherently was good. And I think that belief, when folks become jaded and folks become, sort of apathetic and give up hope, is because they stop believing in the inherent goodness of others. And that to me is more sad than being complicit, is sort of the giving up the hope piece.
And nobody can tell for sure, of course, in any individual situation, when there is or isn't that kind of emotional safety, of course, that we always want there to be that. But it is worth, I think, taking a step back and just asking ourselves in any given moment, should I give this person the benefit of the doubt that right. They have positive intent? They may be oblivious to something. They may have been clumsy in something. They may be on whatever it happens to be, but that and this goes right back, Rachael, to your point about using emotional intelligence and emotional maturity and all those kinds of things, that as long as I frame this in a way that doesn't say, hey, old white dude, you're clearly missing but if we are giving them the benefit of the doubt that, of course, they want what's best for the company. Of course, they're on this program because they at least espouse a particular value. So if you want to help them achieve the execution of that value, then to offer them a suggestion of, what I've noticed, perhaps we should do a little bit more of this. Wouldn't it be, this is good. Wouldn't it be even better? And I think the word even is a 4-letter word that is often undervalued and a missed opportunity. The difference between saying that's good, this is better, versus that's good, what would be even better is this, right? You're giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying their best, and it may genuinely be, regardless of how good it actually is. But to Give them the benefit of the doubt that you can create a little bit more of that safety by the way that you offer your suggestion to make it safe for everybody.
Yeah, and I think, that emotional safety piece is real. And I think you're right, Rachel. I think, perhaps in some instances, right, I have developed more courage over time because there is emotional safety. However, I would also say, and this is where I'm literally starting to see the growth, right, in my own self from a professional perspective, is even in spaces where there is no emotional safety, right? Like, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say, hey, because there are instances, right, where perhaps, you're met with a microaggression, or met with another scenario that is not as safe, right? Where you have to be able to say, hey, listen, I didn't feel supported here, or I felt attacked here, or let me help you to understand what you did and what that actually means to me, right? And that is important, because I think that is how we truly become partners in the spaces in which we are looking to influence. Otherwise, the behaviors continue. Otherwise, the systematic injustices, right, continue. And we continue to be complicit in these spaces because we are afraid to speak up. And so I think, it shows, I think, maturity from a courage perspective as well. It's nice to feel that safety, but for me, I think that, it's also really important in spaces where I don't feel protected and I don't feel safe to still call it out in a way that my message can be heard, and that I'm still, and what I'm saying is resonating with the people that I'm talking to, even if they don't agree with it, because they don't have to agree with it, right? I think that we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. And to your point, I think certain things may not even be on the radar of some people just based on their experiences. And so it takes people like the three of us, right, to really call it out and to say, hey, here's how I felt. Here's how that impacted me. And here's how I think we could potentially handle this in the future.
Yeah. Yes. And I think we can do that because there's leading from the front and there's also leading from behind. You don't have to be in the power position to be able to lead. Managing up is the common phrase. So sometimes to help create that emotional safety for everybody, it can be starting with a statement of assumption of the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm sure you didn't mean this to come across in any way but helpful, but when you use words like this, an unintended result is it tends to feel this way. I'm sure you didn't mean that, but, and it can, so there's a million things, and we can have a whole separate show on the actual tactics and framings and things to do that. But yes, Rachel, did you want to add to that?
No, I well said.
And these are, we can go down the rabbit hole into all these areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one other little detail in there just to be mindful of is emotional safety is not a black and white term. Right. There are all sorts of degrees of it. And my definition of safety and yours may be totally different and have nothing to do with DEI related issues. I know plenty of people, lots of clients come to me because they don't speak up in meetings. They're uncomfortable proactively participating. They will speak when spoken to. They will answer questions when addressed. They will present when they've been told in advance, ideally, that they're going to be expected to present something. But otherwise, they stay back silent because they don't want to take the risk of being wrong, the risk of saying something that somebody else is going to shoot down or disagree with or whatever. So their sense of safety is at such a lower threshold than someone like, I sense, the three of us, who are much more comfortable just putting in our 12 cents, as the case may be, from time to time. So we really have to take into account the notion of what it requires to feel safe in any context and then work from there. So, before we go way down,
I didn't have anything, but I have something.
Go for it.
You just prompted something. I agree that we as individuals need to understand our boundaries and thresholds for emotional safety and have the courage, as Nikelle just pointed out, that even when it's not safe, you are emboldened to speak up. However, I believe that a core tenet of leadership and any organization who calls itself having leaders need to be taking on the umbrage of creating and modeling what that looks like. If I'm in an organization and I see in meetings where it's only one person allowed to speak, I know that my time there is not going to be long, right? Because I know that they're never going to model the behavior for, even if it's not me, my peers, my, other folks in the team. It becomes to the point where you don't have other ideas and other voices in the room, you're going to actually hurt the business. And I think, part of it is the organization that needs to model that. I think we model that as leaders, and we model that at home too, in creating opportunities for our children and our children's children and our neighbors and friends to feel safe to speak up. I think it's a culture that we have to start to really be aware of and model, because we have too many silent soldiers who, they all feel it's wrong. Like, we shouldn't do this, right? We shouldn't do this. And the water cooler conversation, or now in the Zoom world, the Zoom chat conversation is, this is not right. But no one speaks up. And if you're not creating that culture that it's okay to speak up, even if it's the unpopular opinion, I don't know if we are going to be able to call ourselves successful leaders if we don't model that behavior and don't create those spaces for open sharing.
I say it's a shared responsibility, right? Corporation and people who
individual,
it's a shared responsibility.
Yes, among all, and hopefully lots of people will get newly inspired and newly encouraged to take up some of that yoke and take the uncomfortable steps from now on for themselves and for others as well. Real short. Okay, here's my lightning wrap-up question for each of you. How do you keep your inspiration tank full when you're the one spearheading the new movement? What do you do? Give a real quick answer. What's something that we can take from you?
Would you like me to go first?
As you wish.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, the timing is perfect because it's a new year. And so every new year allows us a chance to sort of have that, introspection and think about how we're going to, A, what do we want to accomplish, and B, how we're going to make sure we can sustain that energy throughout the year. I'm reading Michelle Obama's book right now, A Light We Carry. And she talks about the burden of being first and sort of the shadow burden that we carry. If you're other, if you're different, if you're in spaces that perhaps you're not welcome, or you're the first of your kind to occupy that space, there can be a burden that comes with that. And there can be a certain heaviness that drains you, right? And to the point around keeping your inspiration tank full, you said it in the beginning, Laura, inspiration is breathing life. And so I look for ways to breathe life back into me. For me, that looks like my miracle morning routine. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a big fan of that space in the morning that's mine to meditate, to get quiet, to work out, to journal and read, and really just pour into me the things that are necessary to give me life for the day. And the other way of filling my tank is through connection with others. Number 3 strength is connector, if you're familiar with Clifton Strengths Finder. And so whenever I can connect with others, be it a Zoom, be it a in-person connection, be it time with my family and my friends, that fills me up because it's allowing me to also exercise my love language of service. And so whenever I can give service to others and connect with others in an authentic way, there's that word again, that definitely fills me up.
Love it. Nikelle?
Yeah, I love that you sort of called out this time of year, Rachael, right? Because I agree. I think it's a really awesome time to reset and to recalibrate and to be hopeful and to be inspired about all the things that you want to accomplish. I would also say it's an interesting time for those who celebrate Kwanzaa, right? Like, we just closed out Kwanzaa yesterday. And, there's a couple of principles, I think, in the celebration of Kwanzaa, Ujima, for example, right? Collective work and responsibility. When you talk about Kumba, which is creativity, these principles are really rooted in our responsibility to use our talents and to use our resources to leave our communities in a better space and a better place than in which we found them. And so this is a directive that for those of us who celebrate Kwanzaa, take on as a responsibility from our ancestors. And so when I think about growing weary in the process of influence and growing weary in the process of the work that I am trying to accomplish, I really kind of I lean back on those principles because I recognize that my ancestors, I recognize that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? That's number one. My ancestors were fighting for things that are really normalcies for us right now, right? They're no longer, things that we're fighting for. And so the fact that I even have the opportunity to sit in a boardroom daily, right, with executives making really big decisions and solving really big problems in the world and coupling that with technology, we wouldn't have even been allowed on the campuses of some of these organizations and these corporations. And so I look at from whence we've come and the progress that we've made. And I know that the legacy that I am building, to be honest with you, I will probably not live long enough to really see the fruits of my labor. And so for me, it really is about really making that connection with the progress that we've made. But I think more tactically, to Rachael's point, is I look at my daily energy as almost like a tank. And I agree with you, right? The work that we do is not easy work. And so making sure that I am pouring into that tank and I am filling that tank every day with something that is going to really help me from a development perspective, from a leadership perspective, from an inspiration perspective, from a motivation perspective, so that when I do run up against these struggles, my tank is full enough where I can say, okay, all right, let me brush that off and let me keep going. But you can't work from an empty tank. And you can't work in a depleted sort of fashion. And so that meditation and that surrounding yourself with other people of like minds who are walking the same walk, who share the same vision, who align with, your values and the work that it is that you're looking to accomplish are so important to make impact on your journey. So yeah, we share those philosophies, Rachael. I love that.
And I think the
Taurus power,
the idea, yes, I love the image of being your ancestors' wildest dream, and also that it's important that we bear in mind not all of them lived to see what they have manifested in you. And we also, I think, need to bear in mind that we won't live to see the fruits. Rachael, you mentioned earlier the ripple effect, and in the legacy, we'll never see all the fruits of our labor. And knowing that, I forget who it was that said, even if you can't see the harvest you reap, you plant the seeds. And
that's right.
Your legacy makes it a little bit easier for the next person. I mean, Susan B. Anthony never saw the passage of the amendment for women's suffrage. It was never, she dreamed it, she worked on it for decades, but she died before it actually became law. But her legacy lives on today.
Well, but that's the definition of legacy, right? Is that you are planting seeds for trees that you will probably never get to see grow.
Yeah.
Yes. So there you go,
and
everyone.
It's that hope. It's that hope again, right? It's that full circleness of the hope. So this is so good.
Perfect. Well, look, I can't find a better way to bring it back full circle to the beginning than that, Rachael. So I want to thank both of you. So I have taken pages of notes in this conversation. I hope you've had as much fun as I have. And thank you so much for being part of this such important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been awesome.
How can people learn more about you and your organization, Nikelle?
Oh, well, first of all, everyone knows Google, right? So you can Google it. That's number one. But number two, I think in order to connect with me directly, you can find me on LinkedIn at Nikelle King, NIKELLEKING. It's really that simple.
And be sure, if you do reach out to Nikelle to connect, that you tell her specifically that you heard her interview here, not just some random, depersonalized, automated, hey, I want to connect with you. I don't know about you. I never respond to those because it's like, why? Tell me. It's not like he who dies with the most connections wins. So tell me why you want to connect, right?
What's in it for me?
Authentic,
right. Exactly.
Authentic connection. Correct.
Yes. Values in valuable connections is the most important part. Rachael, how can people learn more about you?
Well, I don't have the Google Flex that my girlfriend has, but you can go to redesignhealth.com to learn about Redesign and what we're building and all the different companies that we're building to change healthcare for the better. Personally, you can reach out to me also on LinkedIn, Rachael Jones, very simple. AEL though, don't forget the AEL. Rachael Jones on LinkedIn, and always happy to have a conversation about this topic or any other topic in healthcare. That's my passion.
Hopefully we can have you both back for some karaoke next time. I certainly want a private concert, if nothing else.
We will need drinks for that, Laura. We don't want to have dry karaoke. I'm so sorry.
Can't do dry karaoke. All right. Well, that'll be an offline conversation for when we're done with this.
Exactly.
And to everybody else who's tuning in to listen to this conversation, thank you for joining us once again. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and your platform of choice so that we can help even more people increase their confidence, presence, and influence. And finally, of course, if you want to download my free guide to equipment recommendations for virtual influence, including my picks for microphones, lights, and more, go to speakingtoinfluence.com. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, and you're listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Laura Sicola, and I want to sincerely thank you for listening to the Speaking to Influence podcast. If you love listening to these episodes as much as I love bringing them to you, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please go to iTunes right now to rate and review our podcast in order to help us expand our reach so even more people can master the 3 C's to command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal.
Thanks for listening to Speaking to Influence, Communication Secrets of the C-Suite, the show for leaders who want to speak with impact. The hosts, producers, owners, and media distributors of the show make no guarantees that the strategies and information discussed will result in profit or other success and may result in losses. The opinions and statements of the hosts and guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the owners, staff, managers, broadcasters, or sponsors of the show. No medical or psychological therapy or personal or professional wellness or relationship advice is offered in the show. You are advised to seek counsel on matters related to your health, family, relationships, job, or other business and legal matters from licensed advisors in those areas prior to making any changes in business or lifestyle. No information provided may be suitable in your situation. As always, take responsibility for the decisions and actions you take, including the reactions they may make in your work, family, health, and life.